Hello, and welcome to this episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards, and I have the pleasure of being joined by University of Georgia professor Lenny Wells. Dr. Wells, welcome to Stories from Real Life.
Thanks, Melvin. Great to be here with you.
I'm glad to have you. Well, Lenny Wells is a professor of horticulture at the University of Georgia, where he conducts research on pecan production and helps pecan farmers with their problems. In addition, he grows pecans on his family's farm and writes when he can. So, my first question for you is probably the most important one I can ask. Your response may prevent a civil war. How do you pronounce the word that's spelled Pecan?
Well, I kind of knew that was coming. I think every interview I've ever given had asked me that question. But basically, I use both, really. It depends on where I am. If I am speaking to a crowd, especially if it's like at a scientific meeting or something, I usually say pecan. If I'm working in the orchard, especially if I'm banging my knuckles raw on a piece of equipment or dragging limbs or something like that, it's pecan. But the best the best definition of that I ever heard was another pecan grower told me one time that when they bring 2 or 250 a pound to the grower, they're pecans. If they're bringing 50 cents a pound, they're pecan.
Well, I'm from Texas, and I've always said pecan. My wife is from
Mhm.
Maryland, and she grew up saying pecan
Yeah.
until I told her that a pecan is like a porta potty.
Yep.
That's a pecan.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now she doesn't call it that anymore. I fixed her.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So, how did you begin working with pecans?
Oh, it's kind of a long story. I had sort of an unorthodox route to get here to this particular career path. Um, when I started college as an undergraduate, I really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do, and I kind of floundered my whole first year. Just enjoyed college life and didn't really have an idea what I wanted to do. But I took a biology class, and I had always had a strong interest in the natural world, but I never knew there were actually careers where you could actually spend your time studying that. So ended up becoming a biology major, and most of that was sort of leaning towards the ecology side of it. Um, and then I went on to get a master's degree, and I had planned to kind of go into more the, like I said, the ecological side. I kind of wanted to study birds and do research with birds. And but I had and when I was working on starting my master's, I had a teaching assistantship, and I just hated teaching. I hated it. And I had a professor uh, come to me and offer me the opportunity to take a research assistantship where I didn't have to do any teaching. I just concentrated on my research, and so I did that, and it was studying pine tip moths, which is a pest of pine trees. And so I did my master's research on that. That led to a PhD work looking at the biological control of cotton aphids, or kind of integrating biological control into the regular farming system, looking at cotton aphids. Um, and then um, after that, I ended up taking a postdoc position here where I'm working now, uh, which is the same place I did my PhD research. Um, that postdoc position was studying peanut diseases and the insect pests that transmit those diseases. It was getting about time for that postdoc to run out. I'd had a couple of job interviews, as we may talk about later in another portion of this, but um, ended up taking, to make a long story short, ended up taking a position as a county extension agent in Albany, Georgia, um, which happens to be, uh, you know, and I get into this with a little bit of trepidation, but in Georgia, Albany is considered the pecan capital of the world, and I know it's not in Texas, but
Shots fired.
yeah, yeah. So I started working with pecans there, and so most of my training with pecans kind of came, just with boots on the ground, working with pecan farmers. And those guys, really are the ones that taught me about pecans. And then we had been without someone in the position that I'm in now at the University of Georgia for probably 5 or 6 years at that point. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up getting this current position that I'm in the horticulture department, working with pecans. And actually, before that, while I was still a county extension agent, I'm helping these pecan farmers, and I'm out there with them, and I'm looking at what they do, and I started thinking to myself, I think I could do that. and so my family had or has a farm that was my great my great great grandfather's farm. It's been in our family since the 1890s, and I had never farmed on it. My father had never farmed. My grandfather had never farmed there, at least as an adult. The last one of us to farm that before I started was my great grandfather. And but anyway, I decided to try planting some pecans, and my dad at the time was open to that. He kind of helped me kind of get going in that, and so then it led into, like I said, ended up getting this position I'm in now. So that's kind of how I got into pecans, and it's been great.
So you didn't. I would expect you to say you grew up with it. Your dad did this. Your grandfather did this. So this
Yep.
was your family's line of work, and you just
Hmm.
carried on the tradition, but something completely different for you.
Yeah. It's a little bit off the beaten path.
All right. So the pecan is a state nut of Alabama, Arkansas, California, Louisiana, and Texas, and it's also the state tree of my home state of Texas.
Hmm.
And then my question is two parts here.
Hmm.
Why isn't it the Georgia state nut? And are they afraid they'll be beaten by Texas like they will be in football next year?
Oh man, we don't want to go there, do we? but it is actually the state nut of Georgia.
Okay.
It's not the state tree, but it's the state nut. But yeah, we in the whole football thing. I mean, we'll find out when fall rolls around. But it'll be an interesting year this year.
It will be. I'm looking forward to it. I'm a little bit nervous. Actually, I'm a whole lot nervous, but
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
still looking forward to it.
But hey, as long as y'all beat the Gators,
That's
it's
all you
good.
care about, huh? Yeah, we need to have Atticus on here at the same time so we could
Yeah, we need to get
roll
him.
him a little bit.
Yeah, maybe we need to do another podcast with all three of us on here
Yes,
during
that'll be
football
funny.
season.
All right, so back to pecans real quick. So what's so great about pecans?
Oh man, well, everything, Melvin. They're just awesome.
I happen to agree. But by the
Yeah,
way, before you answer the question, I've got
mhm,
some
yeah.
Texas native
Some Texas
pecans,
pecans. Yeah.
some Pawnee pecans. I'm
Hmm.
sure you know that
Oh
species.
yeah, great variety. But yeah, I mean, pecans are just one of the really, to me, one of the true national treasures of North America. I mean, they're native to North America. They grow. Their native range extends from Oaxaca, Mexico, all the way up, through the river systems of Texas into the Mississippi River and its tributaries, all the way up to, I think, Clinton, Iowa, is
Mm.
as far north as they're found, in a native capacity. But you know, they're just incredible trees. Really, their awesomeness is twofold. Basically, I mean, you've got the nut, which of course tastes great. And if anybody out there hasn't had a fresh pecan, then you really don't know what they're supposed to taste like. You have to have one that's pretty fresh to really get that taste of what a true pecan is. But I mean, they're full of vitamins, full of nutrients. They're good for the heart. They're good for cholesterol levels. They actually lower those your bad cholesterol and raises your good cholesterol. Um,
Hmm.
they lower blood pressure. They've got anti-inflammatory properties to them. They're full of antioxidants, and they come in this cool little container that you can just put in your pocket and carry around and pull out to eat when you get ready. Um, but then there's the tree, which just has an incredible amount of diversity to it. We talked about that range that they have, and of course, across that range, they have, they're exposed to just a wide array of environmental conditions, and so they've adapted to a wide range of conditions, um, and that creates that diversity. They're in Texas along all those rivers in Texas. Um, all those native trees. Every one of them in those river bottoms is you know that's where the diversity comes from because they're all different. Um, there's over 1,000 different pecan varieties out there now. Um, and most of these, came from those native trees that somebody found a tree and liked the way it looked, liked the way it produced, liked the nut it produced. And so they ended up vegetatively propagating these through grafting and all that to create the varieties that we have now. Um, and as I said, there's over 1,000 different varieties of them. Um,
How
you know,
many
when
of
it,
those have you worked with or eaten?
oh goodness, I don't know. I don't know exactly. Probably not near as many as you would think. I would say probably less than 100. Um, and it's interesting in the where pecans are grown along that whole southern tier of states in the U.S. Um, in West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, they basically grow about three different varieties, which are the Western Sly, Wichita, and then they're starting to grow some Pawnee now. Here in the Southeast, we commonly grow about 20 different varieties. Um, and the same would go, for East Texas and into Central Texas. A lot more varieties there grown than you would see in those more arid regions. Um, but and then as far as the tree goes too, as a form of as a form of agriculture, pecan trees are actually good for the land. Um, the soils, are not tilled, um, which helps the soil. They're a perennial crop, which has a lot of benefits, and they're constantly dropping leaves and debris and bark and sticks, and that improves the soil over time. Um, I actually had a graduate student a couple years ago who we did a study. We were looking at to actually see how pecan orchards improve the soil over time, and the longer this piece of land is in a pecan orchard, how much does the soil improve? And we basically saw that the first 6 years, 5 or 6 years, there's a little bit of change, but not really that much different from just being row crop land. Once you get to over 10 years, there's a pretty big jump in the improvement of the soil. And then when you get trees that are 20 years and older, that soil is dramatically different and dramatically improved in terms of soil quality from say what you'd have in just a conventionally tilled row crop field. Um, so they're great for improving the soil.
What is row crop? Is that rotational?
Yeah, that would be your annual crops. Like around here, that would be cotton, peanuts, corn, soybeans, that type of thing.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and so um, in a lot of those systems like that, you're talking about monocultures where you've got one species pretty much growing in that field. Well, in a pecan orchard, you've got more than one species. You've got pecan trees that are out there, but then you've got the grass that's growing between the tree rows. A lot of times we'll have clover. You'll have various weeds that are going to come up no matter what you do. They're going to be out there. And a lot of these, as long as they're in between the tree rows, they're great. They're helping. And just the tree structure itself, being a tree and being such a big vertical woody thing that's got all these grooves and crevices in the bark and all that, you've got a lot of niches there. So you've got a lot of different micro habitats that things can live in. And pecans are highly biodiverse. I mean, um, I think there was one year, I think it was like 2012, and this kind of stems from some of my interest going back to the early days of my undergraduate biology. So I started, I go in a lot of pecan orchards all year long, my own and a lot of other orchards. And so I started just kind of keeping a little tally, keeping track of all the different species that I saw in the orchards that year. And I forget what it was. I mean, it was, gosh, I want to say 140 something different species that I saw,
Wow.
of all different kinds, plants, animals, insects, a little bit of everything. But just birds alone, I think there were like 40 something species of birds that I saw in pecan orchards. And actually, there was a study from Texas that shows that pecan orchards are one of the most highly desirable habitats for spiders, which that may scare a lot of people off.
Wow.
But there were about 100 and I think it was 181 different species of spiders in pecan orchards in Texas.
Wow.
So um, that's just
Okay,
spiders.
that's no reason to stay away from that.
So,
Well, the biggest
yeah.
spiders I've ever seen in my life were in an okra field.
Wow.
And I remember going there with my dad to his uncle's farm, which is where they grew up. My dad's family grew up.
Yeah.
And my dad made me do all kinds of stuff when I was a kid to teach me the lesson. So
Yeah.
like pick okra, which is very prickly. You have to wear gloves, and I hated
Yeah.
it. But I saw like spiders the size of your hand.
Mm,
They were
man.
huge. And so I don't eat okra. That's one of the reasons why.
Yep.
All right. So, how many pounds of pecans are harvested a year in the United
Oh
States?
goodness, it varies from one year to the next because with pecans you've got alternate bearing where they'll have a heavy crop one year, less of a crop the next year. But in general, in the U.S., we produce about 300 million pounds of pecans a year.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And they're only grown in North America
No, they're actually
as a
grown
native.
as a native. Yes, they're native to North America. But
Wow.
commercially, they're grown. Well, U.S. and Mexico are the top two producers, each producing about 300 million pounds. Um, then the next largest producer is South Africa.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and then you've got, and that's somewhere around 40 million pounds, I think. Um, after that, you've got probably Australia. And then there's a lot of pecans currently being planted in South America, then in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Peru, um, and then there's also a few in Europe. There's some in China. Um, so pretty much every continent now except for Antarctica has pecans growing in them. So,
Wow. So I only have a couple more questions about pecans, and then we'll move on to another subject.
all right.
But what do you think of the best types of pecans for pecan pies? And that's
Hmm.
obviously I love pecans, but
Yep.
that's why they were put on Earth
Yep.
to to fill pie crust.
Yep. Yep. Well, if you want to eat a pie, you want something that's got a lot of buttery, oily, you know, just some bulk there to it. And And Elliott's to me uh, are some of the best ones to use. It's a small nut, but it's pretty plump and fat, and it's got a high oil content, and it's got a very buttery taste to it. That's my favorite. But any the best ones would have a high oil content, but
Okay.
you know, there's a
All right.
lot of them out
I don't think I've ever
there.
had Elliott pecans, at least not that I know of.
Yeah, yeah,
Pawnees are definitely my favorite ones.
yeah.
Uh,
Pawnees
what
are
about
great.
for what about for snacking? What would you recommend for that?
Uh, I like Elliott's for that too, but I mean, um, you know, there's one here called an Eastern Sly. We just call it Sly. There's a Western Sly also, but it's a different variety. But it has a really high oil content, and for years, throughout all the mid 20th century, uh, it was kind of the standard nut for quality, at least here in the southeast, because it had such a high oil content. It has a really thin shell. If you're familiar with the term paper shell, that's
Hmm.
kind of where it comes from. Was from
Okay.
that variety because it has such a thin shell. Um, they're really good to snack on. Pawnees are great to snack on. Pretty much any of them, you put some salt on them and roast them with some olive oil or something on them, and they're pretty good.
I've never roasted them. I've had like roasted with cinnamon and stuff at Bucky's,
Oh yeah,
but I
yep,
just crack them and eat them from the shell. There
yep.
is a really nice pecan farm near Austin where I usually go, and
Hmm.
they've got about 50 different varieties of pecans there,
Yeah,
and all with the names of Native American tribes.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Pawnee being one of them.
Hmm. And all those varieties with those Native American tribe names, those are varieties that were developed by the USDA, and so
Okay.
they kind of you know decided early on when they released a variety they were going to use a Native American name for it, which I think
Okay.
is great. Yeah.
That is. That's pretty cool. All right. So let's transition to your writing habits. Tell us about what led you to go into writing.
Well, I've always loved to read. That tends to be how most people who write get into writing. Um, and I'm probably somewhat. My wife would definitely say I'm obsessive about it. Um, you go into my house and there's like stacks of books everywhere, which drives her crazy. Um, but I'm to the point now where I almost always have to have like at least one fiction book and one nonfiction book going at the same time. If I don't, if I get down, if it's just I finish one of those and I've still got the other one there to read, I'm okay. But if I ever if I finish reading them both and I don't have something else lined up to start, it's like I don't know. I kind of start wigging out or just I don't feel right.
Get
Something's not right.
anxious.
Yeah,
Life gets off track.
yeah, yeah. And then I started keeping a journal sometime around 1995 or so. It was about a year after my mom passed away, and I guess I was just kind
Mm,
of, uh, I saw really for the first time how short life was because she was really young. She was 41 when she passed away,
wow. I'm sorry to
and
hear that.
so I just felt like I needed to put some things down to say I was here, you know,
Yeah.
and so I started keeping a journal then, and then of course in my job I've always done a lot of scientific writing, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed it more earlier in my career than I do now. Um, it's not that I don't enjoy the writing; I just don't enjoy how rigid scientific writing is because you've got this certain pattern that you've got to stick to. Um, and but I guess it does kind of teach you to write with brevity, a little bit. Um, and of course, none of us are quite as brief as we need to be probably in our writing. But then when I became a county agent, I was responsible for a newspaper column about twice a month, and that kind of gave me more freedom in my writing, and I was able to kind of weave. I would have a topic that I wrote on. It may be like one week, it may be taking care of your roses or something, and the next week it may be growing a garden, for tomato garden or something. Um, but I was able to weave some personal stories into those. And there were even a few times where I wove in some episodes of the Andy Griffith Show into those, and I got a lot of positive feedback when I was writing that column, and that kind of gave me the confidence to maybe try a little bit more with it, and I ended up probably the biggest writing project I've taken on was I wrote a book about the history of pecans. Um, that kind of came about because I had my predecessor that was in this role before me um, had this. He left me this big box of old material from like the early 1900s. Um, these letters of different pecan growers wrote back and forth to each other, and um, all these little pamphlets, and they used to do. There used to be a lot of farm journal type things out there that a lot of farmers would take, and some of these were devoted specifically to nut production, and there were a lot of those in there. So reading through that and looking through all that stuff, there were all these cool little stories surrounding pecans, and I'd heard some of them before. But there are all these stories here and there, but they were not kind of brought all together in one place, and there was nothing that I could find that really gave what I thought was a good history of the pecan, just in one piece of work. Um, so I started putting that together, and it took me probably about 3 years or so to get it written, and it seems like it took longer than that to get it published. But University of Alabama ended up University of Alabama Press ended up publishing that, and that was great. After that, I kind of started experimenting a little bit with some essays here and there, and mainly with the idea of just getting my thoughts down for my kids for posterity, And along the course of doing that, I got a couple of those published.
Nice.
And one day decided to start putting those on a website or a blog, just to kind of have them out there. And then that kind of has since led to some more writing opportunities. So um, I don't know, it's just something I enjoy doing, and it's been fun, and I really enjoy seeing people's responses to them sometimes. So,
Nice. Yeah, one thing I learned, a lesson I learned very early in college, had a journalism professor. My major was journalism. Uh, my professor said, "Writers write," and as simple as that is,
yeah,
it's a fact. Like you don't have to have a degree in journalism to be a writer. If
yeah,
you write, you're a writer.
yeah.
You can have a
Yeah,
degree in journalism, and if you don't write, you're not a writer.
right, that's
So
right.
it's as simple as that.
And I think sometimes you hear uh, a lot of writers. You listen to other podcasts with writers and stuff, and you hear a lot of them say, I can't help it. It's just what I do. I have to get it out. And as often as you hear that, I mean, it's true. I mean,
Yes,
if you write, if you're a writer and you enjoy writing, whether anybody ever sees it or not, you have to just get it down. And that's kind of an interesting thing about it to me.
absolutely. Growing up, I was extremely introverted, so
Yeah,
writing
me too.
was my voice.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'm still
it,
introverted, and in
yeah.
my
So
role in my job, um, because my job now is pretty much to go out and talk to people about pecans. And like right now, we're in the middle of, all through February and March, we do uh, production meetings, pecan production meetings in the different counties throughout Georgia. And, so most days I'm on the road and speaking at some lunch meeting to a group of farmers about pecans. And my wife really can't believe that that's what I do, because she still sees me as a little socially awkward, and but I've kind of learned to overcome that for the job. But it takes a
Absolutely.
lot. It drains, as being an introvert, when you
Yes.
talk to people all day long.
Need to come home and
It
take a
just
nap.
drains you, So I got
Absolutely.
to have that downtime when I get home. So
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things, actually, my wife and I had a conversation about this a couple days ago. The main difference between an introvert and an extrovert is how you gain energy. So,
yes,
an introvert gains energy from being alone, and an
yeah,
extrovert gains energy from being with
around
people
other
and
people. Yeah.
communicating with people, interacting with people. So, do you talk to the trees when you're out there in the orchard?
Oh, of course. Yeah. It's my
Do you just talk and they're there, or do you talk to them?
I talk to them if one's giving me a problem or something. I kind of have to let it know. After, if they have a good year, I tell them I appreciate it and I expect them to do it again next year. So,
Well, what kind of people talk about houseplants needing communication to grow
mm,
and thrive? Do you actually see any difference after you communicated with your trees?
no, not really.
I
I do it more for
thought we were
me.
going to go in an esoteric direction here, but no, we're just like to the
Yeah,
grind.
I saw a thing the other day on Twitter talking about there's these studies that have shown that plants respond well. They've documented a physiological response to music. I was thinking, well, I hope mine like things like REM and Neil Young and Pearl Jam and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings.
You already listed five groups, and you didn't mention Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Yeah, I
And
didn't. I
then
didn't get
Atticus,
to them just yet.
yeah,
Didn't get
Atticus
to
will
them,
be
but they're,
disappointed you didn't mention them first, and the
yeah,
monkeys
they're
too.
they're on there for sure. Yeah, my trees love Tom Petty.
Okay, he'll be happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of your favorite books, and who are some of your favorite authors?
Well, probably my favorite book of all time remains "Where the Red Fern Grows" by Wilson Rawls. I think every kid, certainly of our generation, probably read that in fifth grade or so. That's kind of where I was exposed to it first, and I literally probably read that book 10 or 12 times within the first 2 years that I discovered
Hmm.
it. And I don't know how many times I've read it. I still, every now and then, about every 3 or 4 years, I'll read it again. Um, but I just really, that book, I really connected with that book, and the whole story just kind of felt like it was written for me, you know. Um, and that was, more as in childhood, that became my favorite book. Still is certainly toward at the top of my list, but kind of right along there with that um, is a book by Wendell Berry uh, called J. Bear Crow, and it's about a town barber in this small town uh, that Berry has created and uh, is in a lot of his fiction. Um, Man, I could go into a lot more detail about it, but there's so much more to it. But it just, um, I couldn't just, my words would not do it justice. You would have to read it,
Hmm.
but it's just a very deep book, and I've read it a couple of times. The last time I read it, it just I got a lot more out of it. I loved it the first time I read it, but it was just something totally different to me the second time I read it, and it just kind of spoke to where I want to be in life, or who I want to be
Wow.
in life. And So those two are kind of at the top of my list. I also love John Steinbeck, Hemingway. Um, Recently, I've been reading a lot of Jim Harrison. Um, you know, a lot of different stuff. I discover new authors all the time. Yep, yep.
I'm
Got
pointing
to.
here.
There's
I'm
one by this guy named Melvin Edwards in Texas that I'm still trying to get to that on my to be read
Yes, there are
list.
actually two. I'm pointing
Yep,
here at the books behind
that's
my
right.
head. So
I see them,
there are
both
actually
of them
two
there.
that you got to get to.
Yep,
I'll
yep.
send those to you if you want, if you are interested
Yeah,
in reading them at some
I'd
point
love to read them.
about my family here in Texas.
Be
So
fascinating.
are those are your favorite authors? And does do you have a you mentioned two books? Can you
Mhm.
round it out to five? Can you give us a list of five?
Probably so. Let me see. So where the red fern grows, Jaber Crow, um, Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac would be definitely in the top three. Um, let's see, Old Man in the Sea, by
Hmm.
Hemingway would be one, and probably with Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath, probably. You know,
Okay,
yeah,
those are good options. Those are classics that high school students hate. So those are
yeah,
good. Those are good options.
yeah.
Okay, now for something completely different.
Hmm.
So, what is it about the Andy Griffith Show that you still watch it almost daily after 40 years after you've seen every episode?
Yeah, yeah. So I started watching that as a kid, of course, because I grew up, in the late '70s, early '80s, and still now, the reruns were on TV all the time, and so I watched them every day, and pretty quickly saw every episode, and like you said, I still watch it every single day, and that's another thing about me that my wife can't understand. Why do you want to keep? You've seen all these 1,000 times. Why do you want to watch these every day? And it's not really so much about the plot of the show now. To me, it's not about um, not knowing what's going to happen. It's it's just about the feeling. I guess it's a little bit of nostalgia. I guess is what it is. But it's just about the whole feeling in that show. You Andy is just he's a friend to everybody in that town. Um, there's a lot of weird characters in that town, and he very gracefully um, gets them through a lot of their problems.
Yes,
and,
definitely a lot of
and
weird characters.
yeah,
Starting with his deputy Barney Fife.
with Barney,
I
yeah,
think about Ernest T. Bass and
yeah,
Floyd and
yeah,
Otis.
and it's really just the whole sense of community in that show that I like, and I think that's something that I have always wanted in life is that sense of community, you know, and if I can't find it anywhere else, I find it in that show. So,
You never get tired of it.
not really. I mean, I find myself sometimes it'll be on and I may not be paying close attention to it, and then all of a sudden I'll kind of look up and it'll catch me. I don't know what it is about it, but um, no, I never seem to get tired of it.
So
My wife and
what's
wife
your
and kid.
favorite episode of the show?
Um, my favorite episode is the one called "Man in a Hurry," where there's a guy that uh, kind of a big wig that gets kind of stranded in Mayberry on a Sunday. His car breaks down as he's traveling through Mayberry, and he uh, keeps trying to get it fixed and doesn't understand that nothing happens in Mayberry on a Sunday, and he can't get it fixed. and
That sounds like the town where I went to college.
Yeah, and finally he gets it fixed, and then he doesn't want to leave. So, um, but just that episode to me just kind of encapsulates everything that I like about the show. You see a little bit of all of it there.
That's awesome. I enjoyed the show too. I haven't seen it as much as you have, and I don't think I've seen every episode even once. But I've seen
Yeah,
a lot of the episodes, and maybe I need to
yeah.
catch up.
I actually tricked my family one summer for vacation when my girls were younger. We went to we wanted to go to Washington D.C. To show them Washington D.C. and the Capitol and go to the Smithsonian and see all the things you see in Washington D.C. And we decided to drive up, and it just happened to, one route we could take was through North Carolina, and we could go kind of up into northern North Carolina, uh, go through Mount Airy, where Andy Griffith, is his hometown, and the whole town is kind of it's a little bit cheesy, but it's kind of all got a whole Mayberry theme to it. So I tricked them into going through there, and we spent the night there, on our first leg of the
Tricked them.
journey. Yeah. Um, so got to see
So
all the.
what was it all you hoped it would be?
Yeah, I told my wife, when I retire, what I want to do is want to move up here to Mount Airy and get a job driving the squad car, driving tourists around in the squad car, because they had the little Mayberry squad car that tourists can take rides in. Told her that sounded like the perfect retirement.
Yeah, you probably work for free doing that job, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Okay, last questions here I've got for you.
All right.
All right, how many courses do you teach during the school year, and do those classes interfere with your Andy Griffith watching?
Well, oddly enough, my aversion to teaching when I was working on my master's had stayed with me through my through my career, and I actually don't do any teaching. My appointment, I'm 65% extension and 35% research. So the teaching that I do is just teaching farmers, and then I do research. I do guest lectures in classes occasionally, but I don't have any classes that I'm responsible for. I have graduate students that I train and mentor, and that get their degrees on working with me on different research projects. But as far as classes, I don't have to teach any classes just because of the nature of my appointment.
So it
And
sounds like you
I'm
wrote Andy Griffith into your contract. Is that what
yeah,
you did?
yeah, I had to have time for that. Yeah. But where I'm based, I'm not based on the University of Georgia main campus in Athens. I'm based in Tifton, Georgia, which is there's a University of Georgia research station here, and that's where I work. And then there's very little teaching done here. There's some. There was a teaching program established, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 years ago. But it's still mostly a research facility.
Okay. Well, that's a good way to wind it up. So, Dr. Lenny Wells, I appreciate you being here today. I've enjoyed these stories of pecans and books and Andy Griffith. It's sort of an unusual route, but this has been fun for me.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too, Melvin. Thanks for having me on.
So, thanks a lot. So, our guest today has been Dr. Lenny Wells, a professor of horticulture at the University of Georgia. Professor Wells, thank you for joining me on the show, and I've enjoyed this conversation, and we'll continue to follow you on Twitter so that we can gang up on Atticus Finch, who knows who he is, the one there in
Sounds
Georgia.
good. Go dogs.
Hook 'em. All right, that's it for this episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine some light wherever you go.